Andrew, thank you. It's been many years, been like 14, that we've been working together at the Biennale. And I'm intrigued to revisit, curious to revisit those early times when we got together and to understand what was, where did your passion for the visual arts come from, or the arts in general?
Well, look, I, like you, I studied architecture at university, and I think as a result of that, I developed an interest in the visual arts. I mean, we had a lot of, as part of the architecture course at Sydney University, we had a lot of artists coming and doing workshops, and we had the tin sheds just up the road from the faculty, and artists like Mike Parr and Julie Rapp, and we're practicing there. So I had a bit to do with practicing artists, some quite well-known artists, while I was at university. And then I went and worked, straight after university, I went and worked for Philip Cox, the architect. And as part of one particular project, we worked with a number of artists. We commissioned art for a building. And so I kind of got very interested in this whole, the process by which artists worked and made art. And of course my career, as you know, sort of went away from architecture, but I always kept the interest that I had in the visual arts, I think really going back to those days.
Yeah, and we all know you as a great philanthropist across the board in the arts. And and I can't even recall who recommended that I speak to you to investigate your interest in taking a role in the Biennale as a board member. I think you may have been already a benefactor, a supporter already.
Yeah.
What was your what are your recollections about the Biennale going back?
Well, I can remember the Biennale as not only being kind of on the fringes of my world back in the 1980s. I can remember going and seeing some parts of the exhibition at the art gallery, but my first real contact was the 2000 biennial Biennale, which was the one that Nick Waterlow curated with a curatorium. And I remember being really blown away seeing Richter and Bruce Nauman, and he put a wonderful collection of great artists work together, brought a lot of great work out to Sydney.
With Yoko Ono.
Yes, the Yoko Ono. It was, I think, Kusama, and really all sorts of things I've been reading about in Art Forum, and wow, here they were in Sydney, and it was just, I thought, really exciting. And so I think, yes, I probably indicated my interest to you, and we'd known each other before that, so I think we it kind of went from there, and I think I actually came onto the board in 2001.
Yeah. And I imagine, I mean, we've talked in the past, of course, and we keep on sort of saying, through our time together, as you as my loyal deputy, and I mean that without any sense of diminution or sarcasm at all. The notion of the international with the Biennale, I think, was exciting. I think you expressed that to me on a number of occasions. Is that where did you see? What are the elements of the Biennale going forward that you would define as distinctive and entertaining?
Well, I think the Biennale of Sydney for artists all over Australia, and in fact all over the region, was the great international art event that happened in Australia. And I've heard stories of artists who lived in Adelaide saving up for 2 years so that they could come to the Biennale of Sydney, artists coming from Auckland, and to see this great show of contemporary international art. And I think that right through from really 2000 through until now, the Biennale of Sydney is the great beacon of international contemporary art here in Australia. And what has been fantastic, I think, is that it has launched the careers of a lot of international artists. So there have been quite a lot of artists who've been included in the Biennale of Sydney, and they've made a major new work, and they've gone on to actually use that work or use their exposure here in the Biennale as the launch pad for a major career. So I think that the Biennale it's only just people are really starting to realise how valuable it is. But back in those early days, I think we were doing something that was really valued by artists and curators, probably a relatively small number of people, and audience have really started to come to it and to realise how significant it is.
Interesting. So when you joined, I joined afresh, and I'd been overseas for 7 years, so even though I attended all of the Biennales, we came back for them through the period that I was working in Malaysia, I didn't have such an intimate contact with the Biennale. And then through obviously the family connections, I was happy to take on this role. And I saw it as a big challenge initially. I think the Biennale had been through some organisational changes not so long before. There were the questions of venue partners that were on the board, government partners that were on the board. We had in 2001 when you came on, we all started to think about how we might reconfigure that, and it took a few years to do that and change it. But there's always has been the challenge, which was to effectively get support for the show, because it was always the directors, the artistic directors, were always asking more than what we could usually provide. And there was no exception even for the first one with Richard Grayson. And I remember how you were particularly concerned about the financial viability before coming on as a board member. And I was so pleased that eventually you did come, recognising there were all those challenges.
I think when I look back at what the organisation was like in 2000, 2001, it was a very small organisation that had a very small team. I think there was Paul Latos-Valier and Ewan and maybe one or two others, and the funding was very modest, and really it was primarily the Transfield funding that went from Biennale to Biennale. Then Rupert Meyer did that report into the visual arts, and the Meyer report into the visual arts I saw was quite transformative for the Biennale, because the Biennale of Sydney was named as one of the three major events in Australia to get recurrent funding from the Australia Council and matched by the Ministry for the Arts. And I think it was during my early year or two, the Biennale became financially more stable, and it went from being a real kind of hand-to-mouth existence to an organisation that had some good government support and the very valuable Transfield support. So it was an organisation then that we could start to build up staff and develop careers and retain staff from Biennale to Biennale. So the corporate memory was built up and experience, and we built up a team of people, I think, who had real skill at delivering the event, at marketing the event, at attracting corporate and private philanthropy, at working with artists to make sure that their projects were delivered in the best possible way. So I think my view is that one of the great achievements that happened during the period that I was on the board and you were the chair, Luca, was that we took that organisation that was pretty hand-to-mouth and we actually gave it a very stable governance structure. As you said, we restructured the board. We were able to, with a review that Shane Simpson did, we were able to come up with a new structure, a governance structure that meant that we could have professional board members, that we didn't have to have stakeholder board members, and I can remember that made a big difference. We stabilised the finances. We were obviously, always aiming higher. I mean, there never is enough money. But, I think when you look at the revenues from 2001 to 2014, there was a substantial growth in the revenue base of the Biennale, and the stability and the size and the organisation structure. I mean, I think we really, fundamentally came up with a structure that allowed the Biennale to really deliver on its aims.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about here was the shows that at the end of the day it was the artwork that also interested us.
Absolutely.
It was all that corporate governance and the like, which is critical to the nature of the organisation. But what was really, and that's what I think you and I, were so sympathetic with that and bounced off each other, because it was always the artwork that inspired us. And I in particular, my first, this was a wild ride, that first Biennale with Richard Grayson, and he being, as wild as, not wilder than most of the artistic directors that we came across. Yet, it was a small show. I think if we had 180,000 visitation, that would have been a lot. But it made an impact. I think people were looking at that Biennale, the 2002 Biennale, as, or rather quite critically, because, as you say, after the 2001, which was, if you like, a retrospective of the good and great with the curatorium that Nick put together, the 2002 show was being seen as a bit of a litmus test case for the model,
the new model
going forward, being the appointment of an artistic director and the individual artistic director, and what that particular man could do, in this case, Richard Grayson, or man or woman. What was your recollection of that show?
Well, look, my recollection of that show was Richard was an artist, and this was the first time that we'd had an artist as a curator, so it was really it was a first in many respects. I remember it was quite traumatic up until the opening, because Richard was still trying to get the artworks installed, but I can remember on the opening day, the works were all installed. I think there might have been a few identification tags that weren't up, and we were blown away. It was actually a lot better and more professionally curated than I expected. And you're absolutely right. It's gone on to be quite a landmark exhibition. And when you look through the catalogue and you look at the artists and the projects that were shown in that Biennale, many of them have gone on to be really important artists. And I think that the decision to use Richard was the right decision, and I think it was a great show, and I think it really indicated the potential of where the Biennale could go.
The choice, in fact, was quite radical at the time.
Yep.
And in fact, we could talk about the curatorial selection process later, but there was a panel that was comprising a number of external people, and Richard went through a beauty parade with a number of others, came out with the colours, and he was seen to be the odd man out because he was an artist. And in fact, this was actually probably the first Biennale that had an artist as an artistic director, and so that came with an amazing vitality.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it, a lot of Australian artists thought it sent a really interesting signal too. And Richard delivered on it. I think it was a great show, and my memories and looking through the catalogue, that there were lots of good things in that exhibition. I don't think the MCA has ever looked better. He really used the venues well, and I think it showed the real potential of kind of what the Biennale could be.
The title was "The World May Be Fantastic," and it was super fictions. It was really made people sort of take a double take on their view of the world, and so full compliments to Richard. Going forward, and without wanting to dwell necessarily on all of the Biennales, but I just thought that first one was quite critical because it somewhat was there testing us.
Yep.
And we, I think, got confidence from this, even though it was actually not such a big budget show.
Yep.
It had, I think, more impact than we expected, which built confidence, I think, in the whole Biennale going forward. Then the question of we went through the governance restructure with the board. We were still working with the same sort of curatorial selection panel process. We were with the 2004 show, which was when we invited Isabel Carlos from Portugal to come on board. There was, I think, somewhat not sure that it was necessarily a big step up, but it was. We started to use more venues. I think we used Botanical Gardens.
Yep.
So it was seen to be a bigger show, even though it was still relatively small compared to how we might experience them today. I know that for me, the vivid memory that I retain of the show in terms of an artwork, of course, for me it was the Jimmy Durham performance piece in front of the Opera House. But what for you, I don't know if it,
well, the basis of that show was kind of, this tension between reason and emotion. And one of the things that I really like about the Biennale is that it kind of reinvents itself with every exhibition. So every 2 years, and this has been something that, you and the board deliberately championed, was we wanted a completely different exhibition. We wanted it to have its own look and feel. The catalogues are different, the graphic design is different, they're different sizes, and I think that was a really successful strategy in terms of giving each exhibition, making it special, there was a real sense of anticipation, I think, for audiences, because it didn't look or feel anything like the last one. And I think in that way, choosing Isabel was a good choice, because this was a much softer, much less kind of alpha show. It was a lot of it was about intuition and about it was a female. She was a woman curator, and so a lot of them were
and non-Anglo.
That's right.
First non-Anglo. Oh, not quite, because we had René Bloch.
Yes, but she came with kind of quite a different sensibility.
Yeah.
I remember the AESNF, I think she showed them for the first time. They've gone on to be, enormously successful. She showed them very early in their career. I can remember lots of wonderful things in that
that's right.
exhibition.
But it was the poster around town, which of course was seen to be causing some furor, but it didn't at the end.
And she included a number of Australian artists in there. And one of the things I've always liked about the Biennale is that the Australian artists and the international artists they're seamlessly integrated. They're kind of seen and installed next to each other. And I think that sends really, that's a really great signal to send, that we don't sort of say these are the Australian artists over here and these are the international artists, and I think that's been a great strength for the Biennale.
Then 2006 with Charles Merriweather, we explored some other further venues, and one that was particularly close to my heart was Pier 23, and I remember Charles at the last minute thinking he needed to have a big bang exhibit. And he chose then Anthony Gormley's Asian Field, which I think was remains probably one of the most memorable pieces in the Biennale's history, amongst others. So once again, as you say, there was this notion of the distinctions that were happening between each of the Biennales, the distinctiveness, given the different characters of the artistic directors. Somebody mentioned, one of the artistic directors, I think it was Juliana, saying the Biennales need to be conceived of as a bit of a necklace, so you have to understand which bead you put one on top of the other. And I think the curatorial panel, whether consciously or otherwise, I think yes, there was a degree of conscious determination.
And I think it showed the Pier 2-3 space. This was a great way that the Biennale was able to kind of get out of the white cube, get out of the institutional museum, I know in a couple of previous cases there had been projects on Goat Island, I think, and small things. But I think that, the Pier 2-3 is a really, really wonderful space that has been used in all subsequent biennales. And Charles really showed that great art can look great in non-institutional settings. And I suspect that it was that kind of gave us the confidence then to think about going out to Cockatoo Island.
So in fact, that was the next one with 2008 with Carolyn Christoph Bakajev. And in a way, that was the real kind of watershed, big change for us, because Cockatoo Island then opened up a whole different viewing audience for us. I think that because of the nature of the island, which was more like a sort of a fairground, the way it was also installed, it felt a bit like a fairground. Families were comfortable in going
for the day, and and of course the thing about Cockatoo Island then was it was still very raw. It had only just been taken over, I think, by the Harbour Foreshore Authority, or they hadn't done much to it. And certainly I can remember the Harbour Trust, we agonised over the sort of health and safety issues, and because there was a lot of stuff lying around, and that's what Carolyn loved. And of course, we can all remember the Mike Parr installation there in the old toilet blocks, and or the old building, and I think it was one of the other artists in the toilet blocks. The use of the turbine hall was fantastic. Of course, the other thing that Carolyn did, which I will never forget, was she managed to convince the Opera House Trust to let her install a rainforest in the concert hall of the Sydney Opera House. And we can remember those board meetings when we sat there and we said, that's never going to happen. That's just who's going to pay for it. The Opera House will never agree to it. And it was Carolyn's, great ambition and her great ability to take people with her. She found a philanthropist from Europe to pay for it. I think it was. And she went down and she managed to convince Richard Evans, who was the CEO of the Opera House, and they removed all the chairs and all the furniture out of the concert hall, one of the great concert halls in the world, and installed a rainforest. And I mean, it was there for 24 hours, and who can ever forget it?
For those who saw it, they'd never forget it.
They were queuing up at, 4 a.m, I think.
I think it was we eventually got something like 7,000 people through.
It was incredible. And, those are the sorts of things that the Biennale did. I mean, one artist, I can't remember who it was, installed that James Angus balloon in the foyer of the Opera House.
James Angus himself.
That's right. But that was part of the Biennale. Yeah, right. And there were things like that where buildings, places in Sydney that they were just revisited or visited by artists in completely new and fresh ways.
Then of course there was the whole demand, if you like, that we were the dynamic that was happening with the state government in particular. In respect of their funding contributions, and through this exercise, through these years, we were needing to make continuous approaches to the various government funding partners, and the state in particular was very much interested in the question of the tourist overnight visitation metric, and I think they took heart in the fact that we were delivering on that our overnight visitation into the city from other states and other countries was growing, and also they were seeing that for the dollars that they were putting in, that the private and corporate philanthropy was matching. So it was a good news story, wasn't it?
I think if you go back, the philanthropy story of the Biennale of Sydney is one of the greatest stories around.
Which is what you were banging on about.
We went from a standing start. We had Transfield there as a rock solid corporate partner, but we went from a sort of standing start of in 2000.
There's the kind of
and you know
private revenue there.
We just really drove that private philanthropy, and people came on board, and they sponsored projects, and they wanted to be part of the kind of priority access that we had.
Under 200,000 to over 2 million in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 biennales in 10 years.
And it was led by the board. You know, the board were very generous.
That's right. Put their hands in their pockets.
They really did, and they prevailed on their friends and their colleagues, and we had a good group. We had a good group of supporters, and you know,
you were number one, Andrew. You were always there. The first of the board and the deepest pockets.
We were always there, and all aboard, and you know, we had those great days on that. Remember the Tuesday or the Wednesday when we took all our private supporters around, and we had as a preview day, and we on the day before the show opened, and so the artists were still installing, and our supporters got the chance to talk to artists and to kind of see the project, and it became quite a sought after event to have that privileged access.
Yeah. And that so that all was achieved by building the capacity within the board staff, or rather the organisation staff, to manage the benefaction, follow up on the philanthropy and the corporate sponsorship.
And of course, the problem we've always had with the Biennale is that it is a biennial event, so we kind of go dark for 18 months, and you know, I think it was a real achievement that we were able to kind of refresh it and burst onto the scene with this, you know, extraordinary exhibition of international contemporary art, and then go quiet again for 18 months. And that's why I think it had a freshness, and our decision to make each exhibition look and feel quite different. So we didn't there was very little kind of corporate Biennale branding on it.
Yeah, and in fact it was always that challenge too, because with corporates they were wanting more continuous relationship exercise through the years, whereas with the philanthropist they were prepared to in fact wait for the 2 year event to happen.
I think, you know, look, what I would definitely like to say is that, you know, Transfield was a model corporate supporter in that regard, because, you know, Transfield there were no requirements in terms of deliverables or corporate requirements placed on the Biennale. But I think the fact that Transfield was there for many, many years means that the Biennale did become associated with Transfield. Transfield was seen as kind of being part of the Biennale, and I think
as much as we tried to sort of find other sponsors, it was not easy to get people to solicit the interests of corporates to step
and they'd
up.
dip in and dip out, and they'd have requirements, and I think that, you know, there's sort of that kind of founding supporter role was very important. It was very important.
So from the revolutions at
Turn.
From Carolyn's show, we went to David Elliott's, the 17th, The Beauty of Distance, Songs of Survival in a Precarious Age. And this was, you know, I remember thinking, we all thought, you know, how do you better Carolyn's show? And I think actually David did it.
Yep.
I really think it was, I mean, it's difficult. Comparisons are odious.
Yes.
But for me, it's probably the highlight show for me, personally, because I felt David had put so much energy and diversity into the show, from performance to venues to all sorts of elements.
Well, David's, I think, much more of a kind of he's an impresario, he's got that kind of showman personality. And you know, who could forget the Sidewalk Young, you know, the spinning cars in the turbine hall. You know,
the Tiger Lily's performance, the Super Deluxe, the Pecha.
That's right.
Nights. I mean,
but they just to come back to those cars, the spinning cars. Sidewalk Young, the artists. I'd previously seen the installation in the Guggenheim in New York. But the artist said that installation in the Turbine Hall is the best installation of that project that he's ever seen.
And I think that's right, and it's probably it was the second time that the Cockatoo Island had been utilised, but the Turbine Hall actually wasn't really filled with artwork when Carolyn did it.
No, that's right.
She had the Marseillaise song. So yes, and then of course there were the artist parties too in that Turbine Hall. So with the first one with Carolyn and the second one with David. And I think where we had, it was probably the biggest party that Sydney had ever seen.
The hottest ticket.
The hottest ticket in terms of numbers. 2,000 people in one space. With free music, booze. It was free.
It was a party for artists. It was a real party for the industry. Artists, as I said, a lot of artists have come to Sydney for the opening week of the Biennale. They come from all over Australia and New Zealand, and I think they were really grateful that this artists' party was held during the opening week. And you couldn't buy a ticket to it; you had to be invited. And we had about 2,000 people, as you say, and they were all artists and installers and curators and people associated with the event and friends and industry. And it was they were great parties.
So we did then. Next show was.
David brought out the ASNF too, if you remember. That was the the Feast of Trimalchio in the round. And I know that a lot of artists and people I've talked to said that just that particular installation showed them the power of kind of where art could go and technology and and that's what the Biennale does.
It was kaleidoscopic.
Yeah.
David's show was just kaleidoscopic, and I think it's
everywhere you looked.
Blew people really. So then, in this necklace of Biennales, fun.
1 second, you put your hand in front of the camera.
In this necklace of Biennales, the next one is the joint one. So this is the first time we ever selected two curators. Catherine de Zaga.
That's right.
And
Gerald McMaster.
Thank you. One from Canada, one from Belgium. This was seen to be a completely different show. It was softer. It was, in a sense, more aesthetic in the classical classical way. Still Cockatoo Island. Still with some marvellous, memorable installations. The Philip Beasley with the tendrils.
Yes, incredible.
So I think we kind of really had established ourselves now. So twice lucky, 3 times we confirmed Cockatoo Island and the Biennale now was an established feature. And this is the thing that sort of surprised me, that I never saw the Biennale as being part of the establishment, but we'd become part of the establishment.
Oh, very much so. And the visitation numbers had gone up. You said 180,000. I think by Gerald and Catherine's, we were at 600,000 visits to the Biennale. Now, some of those are people going back, but a lot of them are. That's a wide audience. That's that's way beyond the normal kind of hardcore contemporary art audience. So that is citizens of Sydney and visitors visiting the exhibition, looking, thinking, engaging, and it's, as you say, to become quite a fixture.
That's right. Remember we talked about, I remember saying myself that contemporary art in the early years, if you like, and I'm talking now even back into the 70s, 80s, 90s, was seen to be fringe. And there was a sense that with the Biennale, my father talking about, of course, the international relations, but as much as anything, it was giving contemporary art a certain credibility, and that needed to happen with critical mass, because you had the critical mass, people could not ignore it.
Yes.
So people could not ignore the Biennale now.
That's right.
And so
I think the other thing we did too, is I think we brought audiences to the Biennale. I don't think we dumbed it down. I don't think we popularised it. I think that by sticking to our our game and sticking to our model, I think we brought audiences to it. And I think, there's a new generation of Australians coming through who perhaps are a little more broad-minded, and as a result of the Australian education system, now they're encouraged to think and to question and not to necessarily just believe the status quo. And we had a lot of young audiences coming to the Biennale, and I think that we brought the audience to the exhibition. There was nothing populist about the exhibition at all.
Right. And the international, we somehow had, the Biennale by its very nature positioned itself as being a proponent of international trends, and so Australians were being exposed to that. That was all good. So now we move to the last show. The last show that was distinctive.
Yep.
For a number of reasons. Great title. You imagine what you desire. I don't think we ever imagined, Andrew, that
it was quite the way it was going to go, but
happen, the way it went. So, can you explain what actually happened before the show opened?
Well, look, this was a decision to use an Australian curator, Juliana Engberg, very, very well respected curator from Melbourne, and I think she did a very fine job of putting together a really good show. But out of left field, a week or two before the opening, her exhibition kind of got hijacked by a small number of artists who decided to take a political stand, and they took a political stand around Transfield's involvement, and I think it was just something out of left field. I don't think any of us on the board saw it coming, and then suddenly it was there and we had to react. So events unfolded the way that they did.
Yeah. And so now Transfield severed its ties with the Biennale. I had to resign as chairman. You took over as chair in very difficult circumstances because there was a lot of speculation around what would happen with the Biennale going forward without its founding sponsor for 40 odd years. You had to bear the burden of trying to rally all the troops solidly to keep it going and find your way through that. And I take my hat off to you, Andrew, because I said at the time I felt like I sort of dumped this load on you and the rest of the board, and you managed to get through it. Thank great results.
Well, we got through it, and I think that it's. I think in the history of the Biennale, it will be seen as a fairly minor kind of blip. My sense now, a year out, is that the Biennale brand is still very resilient, is very strong. There's a lot of anticipation about the 2016 show. We were able to attract a very good international curator, Stephanie Rosenthal from the Hayward Gallery. The most of the philanthropy base has stuck with it, with the Biennale. There's a new corporate sponsor come in, the government funding has stayed in place, and so and my role really, I think, was just to to put oil on troubled waters and to calm everything down and to kind of regroup. And I think it's a new chapter without Transfield, but I'm no longer on the board either. I decided it was best that after 6 months I stepped down.
You had 14 years like I?
I'd been on there for 14 years, and I feel, I feel really proud with what we achieved, Luca. I think,
likewise,
it's an extraordinary story, and the Biennale now is going into a new chapter. But, my sense is that the brand is still very strong and it's resilient, and I'm not hearing much chit-chat at all about what happened in 2014, and I think that it's really valued. And if the Biennale, failed to appear for whatever reason, I think there would be a huge outcry in Australia. I think it's a really important part of the visual arts ecology.
And that's so reassuring for me as well. that, you know, after all those years of work and sustenance that we've put into
Yep.
it, that you would want to see it continue,
Yep.
that baby continue, and I think we're happy to see that.
Yep.
So, great, Andrew.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good story, and I've been really, really delighted to be part of it.
And thank you for your time now. Again.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luke.